All right, so we have about 14 attendees, so we can get started here soon. So just to introduce myself, my name is Hannah. I'm with Springfield Community Gardens. This workshop is funded by the USDA Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement. And we're so excited to have Alyssa of Urban Roots Farms here to discuss transplanting and propagating and all of that fun stuff. Hi, Alyssa. If you could introduce yourself, that'd be awesome.
Okay. My name is Alyssa Hughes. I'm the farm manager at Urban Roots Farm. We are a 1-acre farm located near downtown Springfield, Missouri. We grow 4-season, so year-round, using greenhouses and high tunnels. And the farm on 1 acre, we are able to support me financially, one other full-time person financially, and 2 part-time interns as well.
Awesome. So I have, give me one moment. I have made you the host, so you have that poll. If you want to start that poll so that people can fill it out so that we can better understand what sort of farms you're working with and all of that. So for example, the poll just popped up, and the first question is, what is your primary reason for growing? I'm going to select for fun. All right. How large is your growing space? I am only limited to inside. Are you using containers or raised beds for growing in ground? I'm using containers. What about you, Alyssa?
All in ground.
What are you currently starting your how are you currently starting your transplants? I purchased some starts and I'm also direct seeding. What about you, Alyssa?
We start everything here at the farm.
Awesome. So the poll is still in progress. Let me just see. Can you see those results?
Yep.
Awesome. What's the majority vote?
Okay, so it looks like 75% so far grow for fun. Oh, that went down a little bit. But yeah, more results are coming in. So.
Awesome.
There we go. All right, we'll wait another second to get more of those. So yeah, it looks like the majority is for fun or therapy, about 1/3 of you. It's also to feed your family, and then 1% is extra income, or 8% is extra income.
Very cool. Thank you so much for doing that poll. At the end of this, there will be a survey, and that survey is very helpful, and it helps us continue to receive funding from the USDA so that we can have these awesome workshops. So it looks like we have quite a few participants if you want to get started.
All right. I'm just going to go ahead and just looking at, so 20% of you grow indoors with lights. I don't have a whole lot of advice on that, but I get a lot of questions about it. Thankfully, I've always had a greenhouse. All right. See if I can bring up my slideshow.
Again, thank you so much for joining us. If you're just now joining us, my name is Hannah Hodge. I'm with Springfield Community Gardens, and we are talking with Alyssa Hughes of Urban Roots Farm.
Okay. All right. Gonna jump in on this slideshow.
Awesome. I'm gonna discontinue my video so that we can see.
You good?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the direct seeding, transplanting, and propagation workshop hosted through Zoom. Zoom is something new to me, so bear with me. This is just a little bit about me. I worked in landscaping for a lot of years and in different greenhouses and garden centers. I also owned and operated an edible and native landscape business. I have my permaculture design certificate. And for the last 7 years, I've been at Urban Roots Farm. I started as an intern and then worked my way up. I was the field manager for a little bit and am currently the farm manager. So this is going to be the order that we talk about things. For the purpose of this presentation, when I say propagation, I'm talking about asexual propagation. Seeding is a form of propagation technically, but for these purposes, propagation means getting an exact replica. So just jumping right in, if you are taking the time to watch this video on a gorgeous sunny afternoon, I am going to assume that you're pretty serious. So don't waste your time with bad seed. It's really not worth it to put the time and effort in and then to realize that there was an issue before it even got to you. So you're always going to want to buy seed from quality sources. There are a few that I recommend. Johnny's Seed Company out of Maine is typically who we go with. They're just a really awesome company. They've treated us really well throughout the years. We've had, anytime I've had low germination rates, if I email them, they'll send me a new packet of seed or replace it. A couple, I guess it was last spring, we had $500 worth of seeds stolen off the porch when the UPS driver dropped it off. And I emailed them, explained what happened. I was just like so sick over it because that was pretty much our entire spring planting. And they said, no problem, same day, sent me the entire box of seeds again. So they're a really great company. Other options that I recommend are Osborne Seeds and High Mowing Seeds. They're kind of, High Mowing is a little newer to the game, but they're putting out some really awesome stuff. Then once you get the seeds, you're going to want to store them in a dry, cool, dark, and rodent-proof location. You're going to want to pay attention to the seed date when you're planting. You're not going to want to plant seed that is so old that the germination is just super low. However, if you do find old seed, you can always do a germination test to determine if it's worth planting. Something that is new to me that I haven't done a lot with, but that I wish I would have done more with, is hot water bathing the seeds to get rid of any seed-borne pathogens. So I've listened to other farmers preach this for years and just kind of, you know, until you get burned, you don't know. So didn't follow their advice. I bought seed from a company that we trust, but it's a cheaper option, and I don't know, they're a little looser in their practices. But anyway, I bought some brassica seed from them, planted it early spring, so it was still cold out, and everything was going good. It was growing great. And then as soon as it started to get really hot and wet out, I noticed these weird yellow lesions occurring along the veins, and tried to convince myself that it was some sort of insect damage, but sure enough, it ended up being black rot. And black rot is just really difficult to get rid of once you have it. It will live on any plant tissue left in the soil and transfers to different brassicas. And so we had an awful brassica season last year, and it was a lot of work to get the soil back to a clean enough starting level for our brassicas this year. So hot water bathing sounds really intimidating, but basically you can do it with a pot on your stove. It's better if you have like a crock pot that will get to these temperatures, just so you're not accidentally steaming this, like over steaming the seed. But this chart just tells you the different times and the temperatures that you want to maintain and what that will clean from. So this is kind of basic, but it's really important to be able to know how to read your seed package. You have the days are listed. That was kind of confusing to me initially, but that's days to maturity. So you're going to want to pay attention to that, especially towards the end of the season when you're coming up against the last frost. The germination rate, 91% for this example. If it's under 84%, then we plant 2 seeds per soil block. And if we're direct seeding, we just know to change the seeding rate appropriately so that we're getting, even though it's less than 100%, we want 100% of our space filled. And then the germination test date, usually after a year, that germination rate starts to go down. So even though it started at 91%, you're just after a year or more, you're going to increase how much you seed based on that. And then over on the right, I love Johnny's because they just give you so much good information right there. You don't have to keep it all in your head. So it's telling you it recommends transplanting rather than direct seeding. It gives you a good time to start. And then the other really important thing to pay attention to is if a seed wants light to germinate and you cover it up with soil, you've wasted your time and money. And I have had to learn that lesson the hard way. I know lots of other people, especially when you get into growing flowers, there's lots of teeny, tiny seeds, and it doesn't take very much dirt to completely hide them from light, and they're just not going to germinate well. Then Johnny's also includes the germination, like the ideal temperature and how long it takes before you're going to see anything. This kind of just gives you a little bit of peace of mind. There's no point checking it day 2, day 3, day 4 if it's not going to germinate for 10 to 14 days. And then the spacing is on there. That just helps me on the planning end. We have 50-foot beds, 30 inches wide. And so based on that spacing, I can do the math and know how many plants I need to plant if I'm transplanting, how many I need to start to fill that bed. So here's another example. This is a seed company that you might pick up at like a gardening store or Lowe's or something like that. So there's not as much information, but there's still some really good information to pay attention to. Still has the days on there. And then you're going to do the seed depth. Yeah. And then also on any seed packet, you should be able to find the date. So down there in the corner, it is on that one.
Alyssa, I just wanted to mention, while we have everyone, we do have a chat box. If anyone has any questions for Alyssa, feel free to enter that, and then I will follow up and ask Alyssa as she's going through her presentation.
Yep. Cool. So here's just a good rule of thumb for how long you should be keeping your seeds. As you can see, and probably if you have ever tried to plant parsnip, they have really low germination rate and not very long longevity. Then you have things like brassicas on the other end of that last 5 years. Just keep in mind, even though they can still be viable up to 5 years, the germination rate is going to most likely go down. So don't plan to get 90% germination after 5 years. Right, we're going to jump right into direct seeding. So there's a lot of, I'm a pros and cons person. I like to make lists. So here's the pros and cons of direct seeding. First off, large quantities very quickly. It takes me like 2 minutes to seed a 50-foot bed of greens, which I guess if you're doing it by hand, it's not going to go that quickly. But for us, rather than transplanting in little tiny individual plants, if we can just seed it out there, it's a lot more with a lot less labor, less steps, and then there's no root disturbance. So when you're transplanting plants in from a soil block or from a plastic pot, it's kind of shocking to most plants. So you don't have that with direct seeding. By hand, it's obviously tedious. Seeders can be expensive, especially if you're just doing a home gardening scale. I put a lesson in faith. Maybe that's a positive, maybe not. When you're laying down seed, especially really tiny seed, it feels, it's just a little nerve-wracking at first. You're like, did the seeder even drop anything? Is this actually gonna work? And typically, if you don't have the experience, people tend to overseed. So then there's the risks, exposed to rain, exposed to pests. Hannah, did you see that question come through?
Yeah, so Laura Ernst asked, how do you direct seed your large lettuce beds? Is it like a lawn spreader?
I will actually show you in a video. Hold on. Nope, not that one. Hold on 1 second. All right, so this little video is just going to give a quick view of some of our different seeders. You can't hear it.
Alyssa,
Okay.
is that in your backyard?
Okay, so no, Urban Roots is a 1 acre farm located near downtown Springfield. Mel and Adam that owned the farm when they moved into this area. West Central is kind of an up and coming neighborhood, we say. But when they moved into this neighborhood, they were planning on flipping the house within a matter of years and intended to buy property in the country and start farming. But right next door, there was an old apartment complex that had burned down and just left a big empty lot. Actually, if we go, just play some from the beginning. So this is on State Street near downtown. That blue house is the one they originally purchased. There's the apartments, and that is our backfield. So the whole property is a little over 1 acre, but we farm, or we actually grow bed space is right around 1/3 of 1 acre. We have 1 heated greenhouse. Then back here you can see we have some high tunnels and caterpillar tunnels. The high tunnels are all movable. And off this lot, we supply 6 to 8 restaurants throughout the season, and then right around 60 families with consistent weekly produce boxes or shares, 32 weeks out of the year. And then we also have an on-site farm stand, which I think the video shows. So yeah, our farm stand is located in our pack shed. It's just a self-serve honor system. It's all set up there, and you can pay with cash, or there's also a card reader available.
Wow, that's incredible. Are you guys doing curbside pickup or anything like that?
Currently we aren't. We're able to move most of, like, So our CSA is 60 members, and they come every Tuesday to get their share. So we don't actually bring it to them at the curb. They have to walk up. But so yeah, and then we have the honor system. So we're not doing any, like through COVID, we haven't changed as far as curbside or home delivery really, except for our CSA shares.
Awesome.
Cool. So I don't think the volume is going to work, but I'm just going to tell you kind of what I'm saying here on this video. Oops. Nope. I don't know what that is. Nope. Okay. So these are the different seeders that we use around the farm. This first one is a 4-row pinpoint seeder from Johnny's. Typically, yeah, there's 4 different augers. You can move the little axle based on the size of seed you're trying to drop. And this is our 6-row seeder. It has 6 little augers to drop things in, and you can also change the size of seed. And then this is our earthway seeder. Typically we just use it for larger seed, and it only does 1 row at a time. So the pinpoint seeder, typically we top dress our bed with a few inches of compost, which leaves the bed really fluffy. And the pinpoint seeder doesn't really turn very freely, so we don't typically use this on our beds. The wheels just kind of bind up because our soil is too fluffy. The 6-row I use for all of our carrots, all of our lettuce mixes, a lot of our spinach. It has those little divots underneath that you got to watch and be careful and make sure that no seeds or rocks are getting stuck in them. Also make sure there's no like spider webs. And then you just have to pay attention to make sure that that back wheel is turning, which turns the auger and allows it to drop seed. Yeah, and you can, there's little brushes in there that you can adjust depending on the size of the seed. So there's always a learning curve with any of these. It took me, when I first started, I did not like this seeder. But then after 8 months, I was like, okay, I understand now. It just has its perks. So yeah, here I'm seeding greens mix. Occasionally you just have to stop and get all the debris out of the way, or it starts to bind the wheel up. Yeah, I was just saying that. We say it's a lesson in faith because really when you get done, especially with those smaller seeds, you look in the little troughs and it doesn't really seem like you've put that much seed down. So the tendency is to like do it again and go over it, but then when things grow in too densely, it really prohibits the seed or the plants from reaching a good maturity level. So you just gotta have faith. So the earthway seeder comes with different discs that, yeah, each little pocket there is sized according to the seed that it's made to drop. And it's nice because they're each labeled, so you don't have to remember which disc goes with which seed. It just kind of locks into place like that. So we don't use this for smaller seed because it tends to get caught up behind the plate and just grind it. There is, Elliot Coleman has a really good way to fix this in his book, The New Organic Grower, but we haven't messed with it. So that thing is the kickstand that I just took up. And then down here, this determines how deep the seed is getting planted. And you just want to make sure that the chain is always behind that. The chain drags along behind and moves the soil back over the seed.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool.
Yeah, it works really well. So here I'm planting beans. This seeder is by far the easiest one to use, smallest learning curve, and it's also the cheapest, so it's a good one to start with. So on that first pass, I felt I could still see some of the beans poking up through the soil, so I just was adjusting the depth of that. And yeah. Pause that for now and go back to the slideshow. All right. Okay, so I get the question a lot, how do I know what to direct seed and what to transplant? In general, you're going to want to direct seed root crops, crops needed in large quantities, and crops with very sensitive roots. So examples of crops with sensitive roots are things like cucumbers and squash, most of the curve. And before you do any sort of direct seeding, it's important to prepare the soil. So typically we top dress with 1 to 3 inch a layer of compost. We go through with a rock rake or a tine rake and remove any wood chips and rocks that are going to be in the way of our seeder, and then we address weeds. So especially when direct seeding things like salad mixes and things that are really slow to emerge like carrots, you just want to go ahead and make sure that you are seeding into a sterile bed rather than, like, you don't want to lay seed where that you know there's going to be a lot of weeds. It's easier to just knock the weeds back before you even plant the seed. So the methods that we use are occultation, solarization, flaming, and harrowing. I'm going to break those down just a little bit. Occultation literally means to hide. So I joke that it's one of the only times in life that covering up and ignoring your problems just may work. So the process for us is we mow down any large weeds or cover crop. We water lightly if it's been dry out to encourage weed seed emergence. Then we cover the area with thick milled plastic, typically 6 or higher, or any other solid sheet. I've seen this used with tarps, with dense cardboard. I've even seen people do this with an old dog food bag. So use what you got. You just want to sandbag it and make sure that it's very securely in place. If air is able to get underneath the tarp, then it's going to allow it to cool off under there, and the weeds aren't going to die as quickly. And so this process works a lot faster in July and August than it does in January. So solarization is basically the same thing, just with clear plastic, and this does not work during the cooler months. If you try to do this in February or March, it just kind of acts like a little greenhouse for the weeds. It doesn't kill them. These are both good ways to let cover crops with compost in place, which is typically what we do. We mow it really short, cover it, and then usually when it's warm outside, in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks, you can hardly tell that there was a cover crop there. So flame weeding, something that I really, really love. It's a lot of fun. So you go through a similar process. You want to water the seed bed to make sure that any weed seed that is there has what it needs to germinate. Then after the weed seeds germinate, you can go through with a flamer. And you're not trying to roast large weeds. You're just trying to like kiss with the flame the little tiny cotyledons of the weeds. So when I first started there on the left, we used just propane with a handheld torch. We also use this for crops that are completely infested with different pests. If we just can't get on top of it, we let the pests kind of cover crops we've decided to sacrifice, and then we just light it on fire, and that really knocks back the populations. Then there on the right, this is our new flamer. These are kind of expensive, but we were able to get this off Facebook Marketplace for like $200. So that allows us to just walk over the bed. It goes a lot faster and make sure we're not missing any spots. Okay, so harrowing is one that people seem to be less familiar with. It's similar to a tiller, but rather than inverting the soil and bringing up weed seed that's been buried for months or years, it just kind of mixes, like stirs the top few inches. So that means any weeds that have germinated, it's enough disturbance usually to knock them back. And then it leaves you with a really beautiful bed to seed into. This works really well if you can flame directly afterwards, just in case you're going to get rain the next day. It just keeps any weeds from re-rooting. So there's a picture of the harrow. You can see how nice that soil bed is afterwards, and there's a picture of what it looks like underneath. You can see how those tines, yeah, they're just sticking down into the earth. And we usually, only do the like top 1 to 3 inches. So a bed roller, we actually don't have one of these, but it would be nice. It's just a really heavy roller that tamps down the surface and the soil and gets it level for you. It also has a grid pattern that it leaves behind in case you're using the earthway feeder. You want to make sure you're walking a straight line. All right. Oh, never mind. I already showed you that. Okay, so here's the 6-row seeder that you saw the video clip of. It brand new. They're about $675. This one was a floor model that we were able to get for a few $100 cheaper. And you can see next to this just beautiful rows of greens that are really dense. Typically off one of our beds, we're getting, on a good seeding, we're getting a pound of greens per foot off the initial cutting. So the earthway seeder, it runs about $129, so it's a real economical option. The pinpoint seeder, they make a 1-row, which we don't have. And then there's also the 4-row. So the 1-row is around $200 and the 4-row is $260. So this is like my dream seeder right now, and maybe it's just because I don't have it. But the Jane seeder, you can see it has all these little different wheels based on the spacing that you want and the size of the seed. You can buy one for $440, and that's going to be kind of equivalent to the earthway. So you're going to, if we were trying to do a row of greens, typically we do 6 rows of greens, or 12 rows of greens, 2 passes of 6. So that would mean walking back and forth up that row a lot. So people have also, now there's options where it's basically just multiple versions of that stuck together. So it goes up to a 5-row, which is $1,500, and then the starter pack of wheels is $440, and then you can buy more depending on how specific you're trying to get. So yeah, there's just going to be little quirks. If you are considering investing in a seeder, I recommend trying to find someone that already has one and like go mess with it, go try it out, because it is a lot of money to put out if it's not going to work for your environment. So the 6-row, as you saw, doesn't do well with debris. You're going to have to stop and clean it out. The pinpoint doesn't do well in fluffy soil, and the earthway doesn't do well if the soil is very compacted, just kind of like the it just has a tendency to keep rising above the surface of the soil. So here's some tricks for better germination. If you have, so we use a lot of frost cloth on the farm, not just for frost, but also for insect control. If you can keep the insects from getting on the plant in the first place, then you're going to be a step ahead. But so after I've gone down the bed, after we've prepared it and flamed it, and I've laid seed down, then we cover with a frost cloth, which is pretty thin, so an old bed sheet would work as well. And that just keeps moisture in. It kind of acts like a mulch in a way. It still allows the light through, but it keeps moisture on the surface where the seed is. It also, so we're an urban farm, there's lots of cats in this neighborhood, and that is, they like that fluffy new soil. So more than once I have had beds destroyed by the different cats. So if I cover it with the frost cloth, then they tend to leave it alone.
Oh, I never thought about that with urban farming, like wild cats getting into stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, they help with the mouse and rabbit populations, but in the past they've done a number on our beds. So I get a lot of questions about germinating carrots. It seems to be one that people have a hard time with. So one thing that we do, if I can go back, well, anyway, the 6-row seeder, we fill every other auger with carrot seed, and then the other ones with radish seed. But you can even do this if you're seeding by hand. Just make your little furrows, put carrots in one row, radishes in the next, and just alternate like that. So the radishes are super fast to germinate. So they pop up, and then they have these nice broad cotyledon leaves that pop out and help shade the soil. And they give, they give the carrots a little more bigger window to germinate because they keep the soil cool and wet. Another important thing with direct seeding is overhead watering, so you're not missing anything. And also if you're trying to like water with a hose or even drip tape, sometimes the water washes any seed on the surface out of the place that you want it. So here is an example of the carrot radish trick. You can see these radishes have popped up, and then this little baby is the carrot seed just getting started. So this carrot is actually germinating pretty quickly, mostly just because we've had so much rain. So, and then here's an example of the overhead irrigation that we have put together. I think all this was purchased at Lowe's. It's pretty cheap. And this just connects to a hose. So then after you direct seed, inevitably there's still going to be some weeds in your direct seeded bed. So I really like this tool. It's called a tine rake, and it actually, you can pull it down your beds of direct seeded greens or carrots, and it just disturbs any, like, so when you've direct seeded after flaming, you're giving the seed that you're putting down a head start. There's still going to be weeds that blow in or surface. So inevitably there'll still be weeds. So this, if you can drag it down the row over your established planting, it'll disturb any teeny tiny weeds that are trying to pop up. So I have a video if that'll. So it's kind of nerve-wracking the first time you do it. You feel like you're gonna take out all those little seedlings, but it works really well, actually. Sorry. Trying to get, there we are. Back to the slideshow. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the group chat.
Okay, so now we're going to get into transplanting. The pros of transplanting: controlled germination environment, control over what gets planted out. We always start more than we end up transplanting out so that we can plant the very best. We're not going to plant any guys that are stunted or have damage. We can control the temperature, and it's easier to protect from pests. One thing that I didn't put as a bullet point, but also it gives you a head start on your season here in Missouri, or really anywhere, I guess. When it's too cold to plant things outside, if you can get them started inside and move them out, then in theory you have a few weeks head start, which I feel like most people have experience with. They start their peppers and tomatoes inside. Cons: it is an extra step to put the seed into a pot or a soil block and then have to move it outside later. It's definitely more labor. There's the aspect of root disturbance when you, not so much with our soil blocks, but if you're taking things out of like a 4-pack or a 6-pack that you would get at a hardware store, typically those roots have just kind of, I mean, at least when I was doing it from 6-packs, it was always way later than the plant should have gotten planted. So when you're pulling that out, you're really disturbing the roots. And then lighting can be really difficult to get right when you're inside. I'm always getting questions about people that say their transplants are too leggy or they're getting burned. I don't know a lot about indoor lighting, but I hear it's a real challenge.
Alyssa, we have a question from Deborah Allen. I didn't get to see the photo of your overhead watering system. Is it a misting system?
Let me see if I can go back to that. Okay. So it's right there on the right. So this is just so it's kind of small, but these little pieces you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot, and they're pretty cheap. I think they come in like a 10 or 12 pack for $3. And it just hooks up to a small diameter black tube that you can hook up to a 3/4 inch PEX tube, and then you can connect that to a hose. There's also sprinklers that you can get called wobbler sprinklers that are a similar setup to where you're putting it on a stake, or it's really elevated above your crop, and it's just laying down a nice, gentle rain. But also, even if you just have one of those, like the, I don't know what to call it, the back and forth sprinklers, or it can work too.
Oh, like the basic lawn sprinkler?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, usually those are gentle enough to water things in without drowning stuff.
Deborah Allen asks, what kind of tip does it have?
I wonder if I can zoom in.
I just learned from the Zoom meeting that we had before this webinar on Springfield Community Gardens that if you get tomato plants wet, if you get the actual plants wet, they're more susceptible to disease. Are there any other plants like that that you know of?
We try not to get our pepper plants wet, or even our squash plants. Things that have big leaves, especially summer plants, we just say you should water the base. So even when our greens get bigger, we'll switch to direct or to the drip tape. But just initially, you want to make sure that the whole soil surface is remaining wet. Because that's like, at the soil, it dries out pretty quickly, especially in Missouri on a hot, windy day. And since that's where your seed is, can be a big issue. Deborah, if you want to email me, I can send you a better picture of that irrigation headpiece. So I have better pictures of it.
Yeah, we also have her email, so we can email her that after this meeting.
Okay, cool. Okay.
She says thank you.
No problem. Okay, so there are some costs with starting seeds inside that tend to be more expensive than starting things outside. So we have the one heated greenhouse, and with that, there's just the expense of the structure, there's the expense of heating mats for our real temperature sensitive things, and then like propane costs, the irrigation, those kind of things. So these are the different options that I recommend. I didn't see on the poll, were most people experienced with soil blocking, or at least familiar with the idea? Do you remember?
Let me figure that out. Give me one moment. It looks as though I can't see the results. Give me one moment.
It's not a big deal, but.
All right, you should be able to see it now.
I can't, but I don't know where to look. Oh. Okay, cool. Okay, so almost 40% of you are familiar with paper pot. Okay, cool. And 20% are familiar with soil blocking. Okay, so, sorry. So, soil blocking, you're basically, I'll show you a video in just a second, but you're basically using like a biscuit cutter sort of thing to make these little perfect square brownies of soil. These are, actually I'll just play the video. They are very labor intensive. It's not like with a plastic tray where you're just dumping soil in. It's not like that. There is a process, and it is labor intensive, but we get really beautiful transplants when we do this. Okay. So those are what soil blocks look like, and you can see we're just seeding each one individually by hand. So you have to mix the soil beforehand, and then there's that seeder that you can squeeze out those soil blocks. So it, in a way, is so when you've bought plants before from the store, typically the roots kind of get to the bottom or get to the side, and then they just start spiraling. So with this method, the roots get to the edge of the soil block, and when there's no more soil for them to grow into, they send out new shoots from the base of the plant. So when the soil blocks are getting put in the soil, it already has a huge base of roots started from the plant. So yeah, when you're putting that soil block in the ground, there's minimal root disturbance, slow waste because we're not having to use like the individual plastic trays that only last a season or so. You know, really beautiful transplants. They do dry out quickly, and then once they dry out, it's kind of hard to get them moist again. And then it's really important if you're trying to do this method to make sure that the soil that you're using is super nutrient dense. You don't want, you want to make sure that there's enough nutrients right there in that block to get them to planting time. There's a picture of perfect soil blocks. There are different sizes for this. Some people start things like lettuce or beets, kohlrabi, things that you're gonna transplant really close together in these teeny tiny soil blocks. And then if they need more time and they're not ready to put them into the field, then they can make soil blocks that have just enough space to move them up from this size soil block to that size soil block. Like these literally just pop down in the new ones. This soil block, so forever we just had ones that would do 4 or 5 blocks at a time, which it's already very time consuming and labor intensive. So one way we've made that faster is we bought a new soil block that allows us to do 12 to 16 blocks at a time. And it's also a stand-up version. With these smaller handheld ones, you need the table like right at countertop height. But with these stand-up ones, you can use it in like a little kiddie pool or anything on the ground. So we used to use the black webbing flats that are underneath there on the left, which they're not super expensive. They tend to last a while. But when we would pick them up, they're not very strong, and so they would kind of bow in, which defeats the purpose of the soil block because it pushes them and mushes them all together. So then the roots are just growing into each other's blocks rather than having that little gap of air in between. So we started just using old political signs, which are easy to come by and free. And then we can cut them to be the perfect size that we want. So we have used these little handheld seeders, and they do work well. Typically for really small seed, we actually just use the tip of a pencil. And we do a lot of just by hand as well. If you do decide to start soil blocking, you're always going to want to mix your soil together. Elliot Coleman has a good recipe in one of his books. I think it's in the New Organic Grower that combine blood meal and compost and sand. So if you do decide to do a mixture like that, you're going to want to mix it together before you start getting it wet. And it's really important to get the soil wet enough, but not too wet. So there's just a big learning curve that you got to play with. One of the tricks that we've learned over the years is with things like green onions, where they can grow really close to one another, and when you harvest them, you're going to end up bundling them as a bunch. So we just started adding 8 seeds to each hole, planting it together. They kind of spread out as they need room. And then when we harvest, we can just grab that whole bunch and harvest it and clean it. So transplanting bare roots, we do this with our onion starts. It's hard to get organic onion starts in this area. So we have started buying organic onion seed, seeding it into a flat. You can see on the right, it's pretty dense. And then we trim the tops, and if they start to get too crowded, we kind of spread them out and move them to a bigger flat, give them a few more inches of soil. And then when these are ready to go in the ground, we're just able to pull them apart. So this works really good for onions, which are really hardy, but it doesn't work good for things that suffer much transplant shock. I have seen people do this with lettuce as well. They're planning on growing head lettuce. This is kind of the faster version of soil blocking. This plastic tray is a really hard, dense plastic. It's supposed to last 10 years. And the plastic edges are super smooth. And then you can see there's no bottom. So it's supposed to do the same thing as a soil block. We actually don't have any of these. We've considered buying some and messing around with them. Unfortunately, they're $12 a piece unless you order over 400. So if anybody wants to go in on an order, holler. It's a lot less labor, as you can imagine, to do it this way. You're just filling with your good soil medium and compressing it. And then from the bottom, you're just able to poke them out when they're ready to be planted. So the row trays, this is, we do this with leaf and with sunflowers. It's really similar to bare root transplanting. They just kind of pull apart super fast. So if you are going to do this, you need to be really quick about getting things potted up when it's time. Otherwise, there's a lot of root disturbance that happens. And this is the paper pot transplanter. It is a huge time saver. It allows you to get perfect spacing. Yeah. Unfortunately, they are pretty expensive to start or to purchase. I'm actually going to skip that video since most of you said you are familiar with the idea. So the downsides I have heard, especially on a farm for our scale, especially since we grow year-round and we're inside tunnels, that like our plot space pretty much goes to the edge of the tunnels. So they're heavy, they're hard to turn around, and they're super long, so you need quite a bit of room to be able to turn them around. There's also a debate right now on whether the paper material that is used for the paper pots is going to be past organic standards. So yeah, the paper pot transplanter starts at a little less than $1,000, but then you always have to buy more paper pots. You have to buy a specific tray and a specific spreader bar and frame to go along with those. So it gets, initially it's really pricey, but if you're paying labor, then I'm sure it's going to pay itself off pretty quickly. So here is our transplanter, and I have a video to go with that.
Wow, that looks amazing.
It makes it much easier.
You don't have to like bend over for every single one. That's awesome.
Okay, yep. Go away. Okay, here it is. Okay, so I'm just showing that when the handlebars are apart on this, it's closed, and when they're together, it opens. So I was saying, now you can see through it, and now you can't because it closes the little door inside. It takes 2 people to do this. And as you can see, ours is a little bit aged. This is 9 years old, so it's actually held up pretty well. So you can see she's inserting it into the soil with the door closed so that dirt is not getting compacted inside. And then I'm able to drop the soil block in, and we don't have to bend over. And you can see it's getting it right level with the soil. It's always good to come back and tuck things in. I was saying there that with the 2-inch, it barely fits down the chute, so you kind of have to squeeze it to take the edges off. So right now, everybody on the farm is under 30. We're all in good health and strong back. So actually, even though we have the transplanter, we tend to transplant by hand, just with a spade. We find that we're just much faster that way, and then it can be a 1-person process a lot easier. It's not shown here, but a hori knife is a good spade and digging tool for that process. Okay, so that's the transplanter. They're only $125, but they're strangely, they're really hard to find. I have a farmer friend right now who does have a bad back, and she's looking for one, and I don't know why they're not selling them in the US anymore. Currently, the only place I could find them was it seemed like a really sketchy website somewhere out of India. So here is a little information just on the ideal transplanting age. You don't want to leave plants inside too long. There's the argument can be made that you're actually doing more damage to your plants and setting yourself back if you are starting your plants too early, because your plants, if they're too big and their roots are already going to have to be disturbed a lot when you move them to the soil, then they go into they're stressed out, so they kind of shut down their growing just to make sure that they're okay, and then you can sometimes cause them to flower too early before they should. So I know a lot of people stress about getting their gardens in late, but it's actually, I would say, better to start things later than way too early. So, and this information came from Sustainable Market Farming by Pam Dalling. She's a really awesome grower, and if you're looking for resources, her book is amazing. All right, before we go on to propagation, does anybody have any questions about direct seeding or transplanting?
So far we don't have any questions in the chat, but if anyone feel free to ask anything you'd like in the chat. I'll let you know.
Okay, cool. Well, then I'll just start on propagation. So this information came from the MU Extension, which is super, if you've never looked on their website, they have a lot of really awesome information. They have really good tutorials with pictures on how to do different things. So plant propagation is the process of increasing the number of plants of a particular species of cultivar. There are two primary forms of plant propagation, sexual and asexual. In nature, propagation of plants most often involves sexual reproduction or the production of viable seeds. When exposed to proper environmental conditions, these seeds germinate and grow into mature reproductive plants. Over the years, horticulturists have also developed asexual propagation methods that use vegetative plant parts. This allows plants to be created in ways that nature cannot duplicate. So the different, some of the different forms of asexual propagation are cuttings, layerings, division, grafting, budding, and developing new plants from tissue cultures in a lab. We're just going to talk about the first few. So some of the perks are you get an exact genetic copy of a parent plant. So in the fruit world, that's how you get all your Gala apples or all your different varieties of apples. It's all genetic, or it's all from the same parent plant. Generally, you get faster growth that way than if you're starting things from seed. And for some species, it's the only way to ensure variety replication. So cuttings are really simple on the things that it works with. If you never started your own willow tree from a branch, it's a fun, simple experiment. Especially in the spring, you can literally just cut off a branch and stick it in a pot and keep it watered, and it will root and grow into a new tree. Layering, we'll talk about that a little bit. I've seen this work well with blueberries, divisions, chives, mint, things that tend to spread out, and then grafting and budding. So there's several different types of layering. There's simple layering, mound layering, and air layering. There are others. These are a good starting point. To simple layer, we'll use a blueberry as an example. If you ever started a blueberry bush from a small bush, they tend to like send out these really long arms that are really lanky. Typically, I would prune those back, but if I was going to air layer, then I would just take one of those branches, bend it over. You want to be gentle with it so you're not snapping the branch. But bend it over. I usually dig a little furrow first where I think the branch is going to land. And then with a knife or even your fingernail, as long as it's clean, you can just wound the plant a small amount. You just kind of want to break through that cambium layer. And then I have used landscape staples, but you can even just use a rock. But anyway, you're going to want to pin that branch down to the soil and then cover it back up. And then you're going to want to keep the soil moist there. And then after, it usually takes a few weeks before the roots start, and you're not going to want to, you're like, I know curiosity, you're going to want to like dig in there and see if it's working, but just leave it alone. Don't disturb it. But after several weeks, it will start to grow roots, and in several months, usually by the end of the season, there'll be that branch will have put on enough roots that you can actually cut it away from the parent plant and repot it. So yeah, I've seen it work well with blueberries, but it also works with most perennial herbs, climbing roses, azaleas, forsythia, rhododendron, honeysuckle, boxwood, and wax myrtle. And I'm sure there's others. So mound layering, if you I try not to prune, especially my woody herbs, back in the fall, just to give some of the beneficial insects a place to hang out over the winter. But that typically causes them to be really lanky and to get really woody at the base. So if you, like currently I have some sage plants that are really big, but all the leaves are pretty much on the outside edge and not coming from the center. So after they get done flowering, I'm gonna prune them way, way back and then cover them up with soil. And so those branches will start to poke through the soil and put on new growth. And then it'll root along the woody part of the plant that's been buried. So the roots kind of like will just slowly make their way up the branches. And then after a season or several months, I can take a sharp spade and just cut it right down the middle into several different clumps. And there will be enough roots in each section that I can pot those up. So yeah, this works well with most perennial herbs, hazelnuts, gooseberries, walnuts, and blueberries. So air layering is probably the most fun, but it's also the most work, I guess. So you need to find a branch that is at least the size of a pencil. You're going to want to make sure that your knife is sanitary, and you're going to just lightly girdle. So you're just kind of trying to break through the cambium layer of the plant. You're not going to want to sever it or cut it in half. Yeah, so don't go too deep, but just lightly. You're gonna girdle it all the way around, or even just taking your fingernail, just kind of scoop back some of that cambium. Remove any leaves that are within an inch or two of the wound, and then you wrap it in moss, kind of like you're wrapping a wound, like you're caring for it. You want to get the moss wet, and then you can wrap it with saran wrap. Also seen, I started looking at videos last night, and people are actually taking like small plastic butter dishes and cutting out a hole in either end so they can actually fill the plastic with soil rather than just having moist moss. They're actually putting soil in it and then putting the lid back on it to where it's just like held in place over the twig. And then they're keeping that moist, and it's the same process as the other layering. The plant will start to root from there, and then after enough time, you can cut it away from the parent plant. There's a lot of really great videos out there. Yeah, I've also seen this where people have taken plastic like solo cups and just kind of hung them at a tilt on the branch, and then made sure that the cup stays full of water, and so that the wound is always touching the water, and then the roots will slowly start to grow into the cup. So a lot of great YouTube videos out there if you want to learn more about that. I don't think this is worth doing with most of our perennial herbs, but it's a lot of fun with different tropical plants, and I've done it with figs. So yeah, there's referencing the Missouri Botanical page. They have some really great how-tos. So division is really simple. Here's a picture of a ginger hand that I ordered, and you just kind of cut it at the different nodes, and it's a form of division. So this was all one ginger plant, and now each one of these will become ginger plants. There's actually some turmeric in there too. So this works really well with chives, really well with mint. Works good on Rudbeckia, goldenrod. So if you are doing cuttings, I'll show this video real quick. Okay, so one of the few things that we actually asexually propagate on the farm is herbs. So usually in the fall, we'll take cuttings off all of our rosemary and our sage, our thyme. Typically those things that are a little slower to start from seed. And these we dipped in a rooting hormone first, but if you don't have rooting hormone and you do have a willow tree, then you can just take a twig, cut it into several about half-inch size pieces with some water in a mason jar, shake it up, and that'll serve as a rooting hormone as well. So we dipped these tips in the rooting hormone and then just stuck them in water, and we talked over that, but they'll start to root after several weeks, and then we also do this with succulents. Except you don't have to set them in water, you just set them in soil. So if you don't have a willow tree and you don't want to go buy rooting hormone, there's also different DIY recipes online. Yeah, and so we have found with most herbs that they do better if you put them in water first and then move them to soil after they have some roots on them. I've heard it both ways with elderberries. Like if you take an elderberry cutting, some people say to stick it just straight into the dirt. Don't mess with putting it in water first. And other people say the opposite. So I say it's a cutting. It didn't cost you anything probably, so you should just experiment, see what works. Yeah. I'm not even gonna touch on grafting because, yeah, like I said, it could and has taken up an entire class. I think Patrick Byers teaches at least one class a year on that. So yeah. If you have any questions for me, you can always reach me at alyssa@urbanrootsfarm.com. You can also message me through my personal or the farm Instagram and the farm Facebook. I meant to put more books there, but Sustainable Farming, Market Farming by Pam Dolling is a great one. Lean Farming, any of Elliot Coleman's books. Curtis Stone has some really great books for growing on a smaller scale. Yeah. Is there any questions?
There are no questions. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to include them. That was super, super informational and awesome. I do actually have a propagation question. Do you mind if I grab my propagation?
No, do it.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, can you see me?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so this is a Monstera adansonii, and this one's doing okay. I just wanted to show an example of an okay propagation. Another one that is not successful is this Schefflera arbicola.
Yeah.
I chopped it off of, you can kind of see, it's that one right there. But I rooted it at the beginning of March, and it just looks really funky. The roots aren't popping out. It just it feels jello-like, and it's not really doing well. Do you have any suggestions? Should I cut it maybe?
Did you use like tap water, or did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I should use rooting hormone?
Well, yeah, I would dip in rooting hormone first, and then I would try to get some distilled water.
Oh.
if I leave tap water out for a couple of days, does it become distilled, or does it have to be distilled?
No, I think you need to distill it. I'm just, because there's like things in your tap water that discourage growth of bacteria, microbes.
Oh yeah, like chlorine and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So if you can get some distilled water, that'd be better. Or
That makes sense.
spring water.
All right. Well, we don't have any questions in the chat. I want to remind everyone involved that there is a exit survey that helps us with the grant funding by the USDA. And yeah, you've been great. Thanks so much, Alyssa.